The rain had stopped just long enough for the cemetery to breathe, but the ground was still wet, dark soil clinging to the soles of shoes and the edges of grief. A single man stood before a polished gravestone, shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands as if he could hide from the weight of memory pressing down on him. He was a single father, exhausted by life, crying openly at his ex-wife's grave, unaware that just a few steps away, hidden behind an old oak tree, a woman stood watching him, very much alive, her own heart breaking at the sight of the man she once loved falling apart for her. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that even broken lives can still find light. For years, Daniel had avoided this place. The cemetery felt like a final verdict on a life that had already judged him harshly. But on this particular morning, after dropping his 7-year-old daughter Lily off at school, something inside him finally gave way. The weight he had been carrying alone, working 2 jobs, raising a child, pretending to be strong, became too heavy. He drove without thinking, hands tight on the steering wheel, until he found himself parked in front of the iron gates. The grave bore the name of his ex-wife, Sarah Monroe, etched in stone alongside dates that told a lie the world believed. Wife, mother, gone too soon. Daniel knelt there, the cold seeping through his jeans, and let himself cry the way he never allowed himself to at home. He cried for the years they lost, for the fights that pushed them apart, for the night everything ended. He cried for Lily, who still asked questions he could never fully answer. He whispered apologies into the air, blaming himself for not being enough, for being too tired, too broke, too emotionally distant when Sarah needed him most. His tears soaked into the earth, and with every breath, he felt smaller, emptier, as if grief had finally claimed the last part of him that was still standing. What Daniel didn't know was that Sarah was watching him. She stood frozen behind the tree, rainwater dripping from her coat, her hands trembling. For 3 years, she had lived under a different name in a different city, carrying a secret that crushed her every day. The accident that supposedly took her life had been real enough. Twisted metal, fire, screaming sirens. But she had survived. What followed was fear, confusion, and a chain of decisions driven by desperation. She had been caught in something dangerous, something tied to the financial mess she never told Daniel about, and disappearing had seemed like the only way to protect him and Lily. Declared dead, she became a ghost, watching her old life from a distance, telling herself it was for their safety. From afar, she had seen Daniel struggle. She saw the exhaustion carved into his face when he picked Lily up from school, the way he smiled just enough to convince their daughter everything was fine. She saw him selling his old guitar, giving up small dreams to afford school shoes and groceries. Sarah had told herself that Daniel would move on, that he would eventually stop hurting, that her absence would fade into memory. But watching him kneel at her grave, breaking apart, she realized how wrong she had been. His pain had not faded. It had hardened into something quiet and permanent, something he carried every day without complaint. Daniel's life after Sarah's supposed death had become a blur of responsibility and survival. Nights were the hardest. After Lily fell asleep, he would sit at the small kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills and half-finished cups of coffee, replaying memories he couldn't escape. He remembered Sarah laughing in the kitchen, her hair messy, music playing too loud. He remembered the night they argued about money, about secrets, about trust. He remembered waking up the next morning to the phone call that shattered everything. Since then, he had lived on autopilot, doing what needed to be done, never stopping long enough to heal. At the cemetery, time seemed suspended. Daniel stayed there longer than he intended, lost in regret and love that had nowhere to go. When he finally stood, his legs weak, he placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at the grave. They were the kind Sarah used to love, simple and imperfect. As he turned away, Sarah stepped back further into the shadows, her breath caught in her chest. She wanted to run to him, to tell him the truth, to beg forgiveness. But fear held her still. Fear of the danger she might bring back into his life. Fear that Lily would hate her for leaving. Fear that Daniel would never forgive her for letting him believe she was dead. Days passed, but the image of Daniel crying at her grave refused to leave Sarah's mind. It haunted her more than any threat she had ever faced. She began to follow his life more closely, watching from afar as he attended Lily's school events, cheering quietly from the back, clapping the loudest even when his hands were raw from work. She saw how gentle he was with their daughter, how he listened to her stories, how he carried her on his shoulders when she was tired. Sarah realized that the man she left behind had grown stronger, not because life was kind to him, but because love demanded it. Meanwhile, Daniel felt something shift after that visit to the grave. Crying openly had cracked something inside him, and though the pain remained, it felt less suffocating. He began to talk more to Lily about her mother, sharing stories instead of avoiding the subject. Lily listened with wide eyes, holding on to every word, and for the first time, Daniel saw comfort instead of sadness in her expression. It was as if honoring Sarah's memory openly allowed both of them to breathe again. Sarah watched these changes with a mix of pride and guilt. She started writing letters she never sent, pouring her heart onto paper, confessing everything she could never say aloud. Each letter ended the same way, with an apology that felt far too small. The turning point came when Sarah learned that the people she had been hiding from were finally gone, their hold over her life broken. The danger she feared no longer existed. What remained was a choice, one that terrified her more than running ever had. The day she decided to reveal herself, Sarah returned to the cemetery. She stood at her own grave, reading the words carved in stone, feeling the weight of a lie that had defined years of her life. She imagined Daniel standing there again, imagined Lily someday visiting this place, believing her mother existed only as a memory. The thought broke her. She knew she could not hide anymore. Some truths, no matter how painful, deserved to be faced. When Daniel arrived later that afternoon, expecting nothing more than silence, he noticed something strange. The flowers he had left days earlier were gone, replaced by fresh ones, still damp from rain. Confusion stirred, followed by a sharp sense of unease. As he stood there, trying to understand, he felt a presence behind him, a familiar weight in the air that made his heart race. He turned slowly, his breath catching, his world tilting as his eyes met Sarah's. The moment stretched, heavy and unreal. Years of grief collided with disbelief, anger, love, and shock. Sarah looked different, older, thinner, but unmistakably herself. Her eyes were filled with tears, her face pale with fear. Daniel felt his knees weaken, the ground threatening to swallow him whole. He had mourned this woman, buried her, rebuilt his life around her absence. Now she stood before him, alive. What followed was not instant forgiveness or easy answers. It was raw emotion, confusion spilling out, years of pain demanding to be acknowledged. Daniel struggled to understand how she could let him suffer, how she could watch from afar while he broke himself trying to hold everything together. Sarah carried her own burden, explaining the fear that drove her away, the love that never left, the impossible choice she believed she was making to protect them. Healing did not happen in that moment, but something else did. Truth replaced silence. Over time, with patience and tears, Daniel allowed himself to listen. Sarah allowed herself to face the consequences of her absence. Lily, confused and overwhelmed, eventually found herself wrapped in a love she had missed without knowing it. The family moved forward slowly, not as they once were, but as something new, something honest. Just before the ending, please comment below and share your thoughts. Do you believe love can survive even the deepest betrayals and longest silences? Your words matter more than you know. In the end, the grave remained, a reminder of how close they came to losing everything. But it no longer represented death. It represented the cost of fear, the power of truth, and the fragile strength of love that refuses to die, even when buried. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, please like, comment, and share this video. Your support helps stories like this reach others who may be standing in their own rain, waiting for hope to find them.